Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel AWS DevOps Niche Level. So in this video, we are going to see how to create compliance rule in the service named AWS Config. So we will quickly go through what is this AWS Config service and how do we create compliance rules using that service. So AWS Config. So Config is a fully managed service that provides with an inventory of AWS resources, lets you audit the resource configuration history and notifies of the resource configuration changes. Okay, so ideally it is a fully managed service, and if at all you want to track the configuration life cycle history of each and every resource, within your AWS account, so we can enable the config service. Okay, so typically this service, you can say that it is analogous to a CMDB, right? So what is a CMDB? It is the configuration management database. So every organization will have their own configuration management database, and in that, they would be defining all the, the resources, or in the ITL terms, we call it as a CI, configuration item, right? So we call it as a CMD, which is a configuration management database. So this configuration management database is going to contain the list of all the configuration items within an organization, right? So the configuration items can include the resources like the network devices, the storage devices, servers, routers, switches, even applications, right? All those are called as the CIs, which is the configuration item. And the database that will contain this configuration items along with their complete the configuration change history, that becomes your configuration management database, right? So in AWS, the service that provides this configuration management database functionality is nothing but config service. Okay, so just consider this service as an analogous to a configuration management database. Okay, so whatever resources that you want to track the configuration, it can be configured using this config service. If you want to track the configuration changes for all the resources within your account, that is also possible. Or if you want to track the configuration only to some specific set of resources, maybe just, if you want to track the configuration only for EC2 instances, or if you want to track it only for S3, all S3 resources. So that is also possible, right? So you have to configure that accordingly in the config service. So this config service is going to act as a CMDB for the resources in the AWS. Okay. So I hope this has given you a good insights about the config service. So if I go back to the slide. So config service, it provides an option of creating something called as the config rules, right? So what are those config rules? So in other words, we can also call them as a compliance guideline. So if at all you want to have some set of rules defined for your resources within your account, you can actually set up some compliance guidelines. So let's see some examples here. So for example, if at all you want to set up a guideline, that a rule that all EBS volumes should be encrypted, so you can actually configure that rule. So by default, AWS config is going to check all the EBS volumes, whatever is getting provision, and it is going to check whether the volume is encrypted or not. If the volume is not encrypted, then based on the action, whatever we configure for the non-compliance, so whether it can be an automated action to send an email notification or an action to encrypt the volumes, right? So based on that, this compliance rules will trigger the notification. Okay. The other compliance guideline can be instance must be within a VPC. So if at all your instance is not part of a VPC, if it is part of a default VPC but not part of a custom VPC, then you can trigger a non-compliance notification. Similarly, you can also set a compliance rule that all the instances must be tagged with a environment type. If at all the environment type tag is missing for any of the instance, again, that can be flagged as a non-compliance notification. So like that, there are a good number of default compliance notifications or the compliance rules what the config service provides. And based on our requirement within the organization, we can go ahead and set up those compliance rules. Right? So it is more of a security enabling service, right? So we can configure some additional security rules in the form of compliance guidelines using this config service. Okay, so now let us go ahead and do some lab demo on the config service. So what are all the steps? First is we will turn on the recording for AWS config. Next, we will configure one simple compliance rule and see how that works. Then we will validate if the compliance rule is working as expected. Okay. So first, let's go ahead and turn on the recording for AWS config. So I am in my AWS console and let me search for config here. So you can see here config track the resource inventory and the changes happening to the resource. That is why it is a CMDB. So if I click config, so this is the AWS config dashboard, right? So here, first thing what you need to do is we need to turn on the recording because we need to tell config to start recording the activities that is happening to each and every resources within this account. Does it have to, record or track the changes for all the resources or only for specific set of resources? That is what you define in the recording. So in order to turn on the recording, I click settings here, right? So I click settings. And then you can see here by default, the recording is off because the moment you switch on the recorder, that's when AWS config will start tracking each and every resources within your account and also keep a complete tab of the various configuration changes that is happening to the resources. Okay. So what I will do, let me click edit here and I will just say enable recording. So you can see a message here, AWS config will start recording changes to your resource configurations. You can stop the recording at any time. Okay. So here one point to remember, team. So the moment you enable the recording for the AWS config, it becomes a chargeable service. Okay. So because the billing incurred for the AWS config service is purely on the recording and the number of CIs that it is recording the configuration changes. And this is what I was mentioning. Once the recording has been enabled, you have two types of recording methods. You can see here all resource type. Do you want to record the configuration changes of all the resource types with customizable overrides, or do you want to do it only for specific resource types? Okay. So in my case, I will just select specific resource type and I want to do it for EC2 instance alone, right? I don't want config to record the configuration changes happening to other resources like S3 bucket or Route 53, etc. I want to limit it only to the EC2 instance. Okay, and there are some default data retention period, the IAM role. It's going to use the default service linked role, etc. So I'm going to just leave this configuration as it is, and I'm also going to tell the service to create a S3 bucket in order to upload all the information that it is tracking. Now, let me just click save. Creating some error here. Create a bucket. Okay. We go back to the settings. Okay, you can see that the recording is on, right? So yeah, I think it has started with the recording already. And if I go into the dashboards, fine. Now the next step is we need to create a compliance rule. So let's go ahead and create one compliance rule. So I will click rules here and I will click add rule. And what is the compliance rule I will add? So you have various default compliance rules that is available. Access keys rotated, account part of the organizations, ACM certificate, expiration check. Like this, you have good number of built-in compliance rules. So I'm going to use one of the rules, which is EIP attached. So what this rule will do is, if at all you have an elastic IP address associated with your AWS account, but that account is, sorry, but that elastic IP is not assigned to any EC2 instance, then that is going to be flagged as a compliance notification by the config service. That is this rule EIP attached. You can see here, this rule checks if all elastic IP addresses that are allocated to an AWS account are attached to the EC2 instances or if they are in use by the ENI. If not, it is going to flag it as a non-compliance. Okay, so this is one example of a compliance rule, and this is what I'm going to use for our lab, right? So let me select this rule. I will click next. I'm going to maybe, restrict only to the resources here. That is EC2, AWS EC2 EIP. And if at all you want to maybe restrict to only one instance, I can even, restrict to this particular instance, right? So maybe let me grab the IP address of this instance. I can just enter the resource identified here. Okay, click next. Save. Right, so this is how you create a compliance rule and save the compliance rule. So you can see now EIP hyphen attached. So this rule is going to be activated or it is going to be flagged as a non-compliance if at all we have an elastic IP in the account, but it is not associated with the EC2 instance, any of the EC2 instances within this region. Okay. Okay, all resource categories. I'm just checking if I can just limit it to our EC2 instance, EC2. AWS EC2 Elastic IP. Fine. Okay. I think we can maybe just, leave it to all the instances and we can verify it for the instance whichever is active now. Okay. So in order to test this scenario, now we have actually created a compliance rule, right? So this is what we have done. We had turned on the recording for AWS config. We have configured a compliance rule. Now we will validate if the compliance rule is working as expected. How do we check it? First and foremost, what I will do is I will create a elastic IP address and I will have it within my account, but I'm not going to allocate it to the instance. Right. So for example, I will say allocate elastic IP and then just click allocate. Okay, now this is the elastic IP that we have created. But it is yet to be allocated to any of the instances. It is just now tied to my account. But what is our compliance rule? If at all there is an elastic IP in the account, but it is not really associated with any instance, there should be a non-compliance which has to be flagged, right? So ideally in this scenario, we have an elastic IP here, but it is not allocated to the instance. So ideally, we should see a non-compliance flagged from the AWS config service. So let us wait for some time. Okay, you can see that now it has loaded our rules. So this is our rule, EAP-attached. But we'll have to wait for some time to see when this rule is getting kicked off and showing the non-compliance, right? So it will take some time to, collect the information about the instances and cross-check with this compliance rule. I'm going to pause the video for some time, and then, we will wait till it is detecting the non-compliance. So we had set up a compliance rule, and now we will validate if the compliance rule is working as expected. So let me go back to the AWS config dashboard. Now, if you see here in the dashboard, it is saying there is one non-compliant resource. Can you see here? One non-compliant rule and one non-compliant resource. Basically, it has detected the non-compliance. So what was our rule? So our rule was EIP-attached. That is, whenever there is an elastic IP available within your account, but when it is not assigned to any of the EC2 instance, that should be flagged as a non-compliance, right? So in our case, that is the same scenario, right? So we have an elastic IP address, which I just assigned to this account. You can see here, this is the elastic IP address that I had created. But if you see, this IP is not associated with any of the EC2 instance. And that is the reason that has been flagged as the non-compliance. So if at all you want to, convert this non-compliance to a compliance, what we generally do, we'll have to allocate this as elastic IP to the EC2 instance, right? So for what I will do, I will go to actions. I will say associate elastic IP address. Then I'm going to select the instance, whichever is in this region, that is a web server. And then I will just say associate. Now, after some time, you will see that the compliance will get automatically resolved and it will turn into green. We go back to the dashboard. Currently, it is still showing as a non-compliance, but very shortly, this non-compliance should be able to turn into the compliance. Okay, so this is how you basically turn on the recording using the config service, mentioning if it has to record the configuration changes of all the resources within your account or only the specific resources within the account. Then you configure your custom rules. There are a lot of default custom rules that is available. So you can use any of the compliance rules in order to detect any non-compliance and then alert you whenever there is a non-compliance, right? So you also have something called as a compliance action. So compliance action will be nothing but executing a script that will perform any specific action, or it is going to trigger an email notification whenever any non-compliance is detected. So let me just check whether the compliance is resolved. Maybe I think it might take some more time to resolve the compliance. Okay. So Tim, maybe before I close this call, I also just want to let you know that I am delivering training courses on AWS as well as DevOps, right? So if anyone would be interested, you can send an email to this mentioned email ID. So this AWS course is mainly focused on the SysOps certified administration exam and the DevOps. Basically, I will be covering all the tools, the latest tools that is used in the market today across each of the DevOps lifecycle, including Kubernetes, Terraform, etc. So if anyone interested, just send an email to this email ID. The training mode is going to be via Zoom, and the class recordings will be uploaded onto the Google Drive at the end of each and every class. So whether it is AWS or DevOps, it is going to be a 5 to 6 weeks of interactive course, and it is completely focused on the hands-on lab exercises. Okay, so that's quickly about the training sessions that I conduct. Oh, let us quickly check the. Okay, you can see here now the compliance is gone, right? You can see now the non-compliance has been changed into compliance, right? So zero non-compliance rules. So one compliant rule, okay, which means that since we have allocated the elastic IP address to the instance within the account, now the non-compliance has been turned into the compliance. Okay, so this is how you use the service to set up your non-compliance notifications. I hope this video on AWS config was helpful. So if at all you like the content, you can press the like button. And if you want to share this video to your known circles, you can please go ahead and share it. So thank you everyone. And I will meet you all in my next video. I forgot to add a point. So once config lab is done, I suggest you to please turn off the recording. Otherwise, it will be incurring the billing charges within that region. So how do you turn off the recording? You go to the config main dashboard and then you click settings here, right? And you can see that the recording is currently on. You click edit and then you can just say, remove the check mark from enabled recording and it will ask for a confirmation. Just click confirm and you can see the message that recording is off. Okay. And whatever resources that you have provisioned for specifically for the config lab, you can shut down all the resources. Okay, because config service is charged mainly based on the time it is recording the resources. So it's important that you turn off the recording once you are done with your config lab. Okay, so just thought of mentioning that. So thank you all everyone, and I will meet you in my next video.